Commander Hanami stood on the bridge of the destroyer Amajurai, watching the dark waters of Blackhead Strait stretch before him like black glass. It was August 1943, and the Solomon Islands had become a graveyard for ships from both sides. But tonight, Hanami felt confident. His destroyer was a predator in these waters, and nothing could challenge its power. The war in the Pacific had been raging for nearly 2 years now. After Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Japanese forces had swept across the ocean like a tsunami. They had taken the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, and dozens of islands. Their destroyers were the fastest and most powerful in the world. The Imperial Japanese Navy had proven itself unstoppable in the early months of war. But things were changing now in August 1943. The Americans had stopped the Japanese advance at Midway a year earlier. Now both sides were locked in a brutal struggle for control of the Solomon Islands. Every night, ships clashed in these narrow straits. The Japanese called it the Tokyo Express, running supplies and troops to their isolated garrisons. The Americans called it the Rat Run. Hanami had been trained at the Imperial Naval Academy in Adajima. He learned that Japanese ships were superior to anything the Americans could build. Japanese destroyers could make 35 knots, maybe 38 in calm seas. They carried powerful torpedoes called long lances that could sink any ship with a single hit. Their crews were the best trained in the world. "Commander, radar contact." The voice of Seaman Tanaka broke through the quiet night. The young radar operator looked nervous in the green glow of his screen. "Multiple contacts, moving very fast. Speed appears to be 40 knots, sir." Hanami walked over to the radar station and looked at the scope. He saw several small blips moving across the screen at incredible speed. He shook his head and smiled. "Impossible," he said calmly. "The equipment must be malfunctioning. No boat can move at 40 knots. Check your calibration, Tanaka." Lieutenant Kohei, the second in command, stepped closer. He was younger than Hanami, only 26 years old. He had fought in fewer battles, but he paid attention to intelligence reports. "Commander, the Americans have been using small torpedo boats," Kohei said carefully. "The intelligence briefings mentioned they might be faster than we expect." Hanami waved his hand dismissively. "I have read those reports. They speak of wooden boats with airplane engines. Toys for rich Americans to play with. They cannot harm a destroyer. We have 800 tons of steel. They have splinters and gasoline." This was the attitude that dominated Japanese naval thinking in 1943. The Japanese Navy had spent decades building powerful battleships and destroyers. They believed in the supremacy of big guns and heavy armor. Small boats were beneath their concern. They were targets for machine guns, nothing more. Tanaka looked at his radar again. "Sir, the contacts are getting closer. I count 6 distinct targets. They are definitely moving at high speed." "Then they're American fighters," Hanami said. "Aircraft returning to their base. That would explain the speed." But even as he spoke, he felt a small doubt creeping into his mind. The contacts were too low, too close to the water. Aircraft would be higher. He picked up his binoculars and scanned the horizon. The night was very dark. No moon hung in the sky, and heavy clouds blocked the stars. This was perfect weather for the Tokyo Express runs. Japanese ships could slip through the straits unseen, deliver their cargo, and escape before dawn brought American aircraft. Behind the Amajurai, 3 transport ships carried supplies for the garrison on Kalambangar Island. 2 more destroyers protected the convoy. It was a standard mission, one they had run dozens of times before. "Sir, I can hear something," said the lookout on the forward gun position. "Engines. Very loud engines." Now Hanami heard it too. A deep, powerful roar echoing across the water. It sounded like aircraft engines, but there were no planes in the sky. The sound came from sea level, growing louder with each passing second. "Battle stations," Hanami ordered. "Prepare anti-aircraft guns." The crew rushed to their positions. The destroyer's guns swung toward the sky, but there was nothing in the sky to shoot at. The roaring engines grew louder and louder, a thunder that seemed to shake the very air. Then Hanami saw them. White wakes cutting through the black water, approaching at impossible speed. Not one, but 6 boats, spreading out in attack formation. They were small, maybe 80 feet long, moving faster than anything he had ever seen on the water. "Contact the convoy," he shouted. "We have surface attack." Small craft approaching at high speed. The radio operator began transmitting warnings. The other destroyers in the convoy turned to face this unexpected threat, but their guns were designed to hit big ships moving at normal speeds. These American boats were darting across the water like water insects, zigzagging and changing course every few seconds. Tanaka had been right. The radar had been right. These boats were actually moving at 40 knots, maybe even faster. Hanami felt his confidence crack like thin ice. "Open fire," he commanded. "All guns target those boats." The night exploded with gunfire. Tracers cut through the darkness like red lightning. The destroyers' guns boomed and flashed. But the American boats kept coming, impossibly fast, impossibly agile. Hanami gripped the bridge railing. For the first time in his career, he felt something he had never experienced before in battle. He felt doubt. These are not toys. These were weapons, and they were coming straight for his convoy. The roar of their engines was deafening now. In the muzzle flashes from his own guns, Hanami caught glimpses of the American boats. They looked like racing boats, sleek and low to the water. He could see men on their decks, manning guns and torpedo tubes. "Hard a port," he ordered. "Increase speed to maximum." The Amagirai heeled over as it turned. Its powerful engines pushed the destroyer to 36 knots. But even at full speed, Hanami knew the truth now. Those American boats were faster. Much faster. The game had changed, and no one had told him the new rules. 12 hours earlier, the sun had been setting over Rendover Island. Lieutenant John F. Kennedy sat on the deck of PT-109, checking his torpedo tube for the third time. The boat rocked gently in the harbor, and around him, other PT boats were preparing for the night patrol. The PT stood for Patrol Torpedo. These boats were America's answer to Japanese naval dominance in 1943. When the war started in December 1941, the United States had very few ships in the Pacific. The Japanese had destroyed much of the fleet at Pearl Harbor. America needed weapons that could be built quickly and fight effectively against the powerful Japanese Navy. The PT boats were born from desperation and innovation. They were only 77 feet long, built from plywood and mahogany. But what made them special was speed. Each boat had 3 Packard engines, the same engines used in racing cars and luxury automobiles. Together, these 12-cylinder monsters produced 4,500 horsepower. That was enough to push the lightweight boat to 41 knots in calm water. "Engines are purring like kittens, Lieutenant," said motor machinist mate Patrick McMahon. He wiped grease from his hands with a rag. McMahon loved those engines more than anything in the world. He could hear problems before they happened, could coax extra speed from the motors when it mattered most. Kennedy nodded. "We're going to need every bit of speed tonight. Intelligence says the Tokyo Express is running again." The Tokyo Express was the American nickname for Japanese supply runs through the Solomon Islands. Japanese destroyers would race down the slot between islands at night, deliver troops and supplies, and race back before dawn. They did this to avoid American aircraft that ruled the skies during daylight hours. Torpedo man Edmund Druich checked the 4 torpedo tubes mounted on the deck. Each torpedo weighed over 2,000 pounds and carried 300 pounds of explosive. They were designed to sink big ships. One good hit could break a destroyer in half. "Torpedoes are ready," Druich reported. "If we get close enough, we can hurt them." That was the problem with PT boat tactics in August 1943. The torpedoes were not very reliable. Sometimes they ran too deep and passed under enemy ships. Sometimes they failed to explode. Sometimes they ran in circles and nearly hit the PT boat that fired them. The crews had learned not to trust them completely, but they trusted their speed, and they trusted their guns. Each PT boat mounted machine guns and a 37mm cannon. These weapons could not sink a destroyer, but they could shoot back and make the enemy think twice. As darkness fell, the squadron commander called all the PT boat captains to a briefing. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Warfield spread a map on a table under a dim red light. Coast watchers report a Japanese convoy heading down the slot tonight, Warfield said. At least 3 destroyers and 3 transports. They will pass through Blackhead Strait around midnight. Kennedy studied the map. Blackhead Strait was a narrow passage of water between Kolombangara and Arundel Islands. It was perfect for an ambush. The Japanese ships would have to slow down to navigate the strait. That was when the PT boats would strike. We split into 2 groups, Warfield continued. Kennedy, you take your division and set up on the north side. I will take my boats to the south. We hit them from both sides at once. Speed is our weapon. Get in fast, fire torpedoes, get out faster. The briefing ended, and the crews returned to their boats. Kennedy gathered his men around him. There were 13 crew members on PT 109. Most were very young, barely 20 years old. But they had been fighting in these waters for months. They knew the risks. Listen up, Kennedy said. Those Japanese destroyers are bigger than us. They are faster than we thought possible. They have bigger guns. But we have surprise and we have speed. We go in dark, engines quiet. When I give the word, we light them up and run like hell. The men nodded. Some looked scared. Some looked excited. All of them knew this was dangerous work. In the past few months, several PT boats had been sunk by Japanese destroyers. The big ships could cut the small boats in half with their bows. Their guns could blow a PT boat to splinters with a single direct HIT at 11 p.m. The PT boats left Rendova Harbor. They ran slowly at first, engines barely making noise. Kennedy stood at the helm, steering by compass and by feel. There were no lights on any boat. They were invisible shadows on Blackwater. By 11:45, they reached their positions in Blackhead Strait. Kennedy cut his engines to idle. The boat drifted silently. Around him in the darkness, he knew 3 other PT boats were doing the same thing. They were spread across the strait like a net, waiting for the prey to swim into their trap. Contact, whispered radio man John McGuire. He pressed the headphones tight against his ears. Radar picks up multiple large ships entering the strait from the north. Range 6,000 yards and closing. Kennedy felt his heart beat faster. 6,000 yards. About 3 miles. The Japanese were coming. Pass the word to all boats, Kennedy ordered quietly. Stand by to attack on my signal. Minute crawl by like hours. The sound of distant engines reached them across the water. Deep, powerful engines. Destroyer engines. Kennedy could see nothing in the darkness, but he knew they were there. Range for 1,000 yards, McGuire reported. Start engines, Kennedy said. All 3. Bring them up slow. McMahon fired up the Packard engines one by one. They rumbled to life, smooth and powerful. The sound was deep and rich, like thunder waiting to break free. Range 2,000 yards. Now, Kennedy could see them. Dark shapes against dark water, but moving real close. 3 destroyers in line, protecting the transport ships behind them. All boats attack, Kennedy shouted into his radio. Attack, attack, attack. He pushed all 3 throttles forward to maximum. The PT 109 leaped forward like a racehorse at the starting gate. The engines roared. The boat accelerated so fast that spray flew over the bow in sheets. Around him, the other PT boats did the same. Suddenly, the quiet night exploded with sound and fury. 6 PT boats racing at 40 knots, charging straight at the Japanese convoy. The first torpedo struck the lead transport ship at exactly 12:07 a.m. The explosion lit up Blackhead Strait like daylight for 3 seconds. A column of fire and water shot 200 feet into the air. The sound of the blast rolled across the water like thunder. Commander Hanami watched from the bridge of the WWII as the transport ship began to list. He had failed. These small American boats had gotten through his defenses and struck the convoy. His face burned with shame and anger. All destroyers, pursue and destroy those boats, he ordered into the radio. Do not let them escape. The 3 Japanese destroyers wheeled around like hunting dogs. Their searchlights stabbed through the darkness, trying to catch the fleeing PT boats in their beams. When a searchlight found a target, the destroyers' guns opened fire immediately. The battle became chaos. Tracers crisscrossed the dark water in every direction. The PT boats scattered like frightened fish, each one racing away at maximum speed. The destroyers gave chase, their powerful engines pushing them to 36 knots. But the American boats were faster. PT 157 was not fast enough. A searchlight caught it turning to port. 3 Japanese destroyers focused their fire on that single boat. Shells bracketed it, sending up fountains of water. Then a 5-inch shell hit the boat directly in the engine room. The explosion tore PT 157 apart. Burning gasoline spread across the water. The crew jumped overboard, swimming away from the flames. 2 PT boats immediately turned back, racing through Japanese gunfire to pick up survivors. This was the unwritten rule of PT boat warfare. You never left your brothers behind. Kennedy watched PT 157 die from 2,000 yards away. He wanted to help, but his mission was not finished. He still had 4 torpedoes aboard. The transport ships were still there, wounded but not sinking. "Come around for another attack run," he ordered. "Target the damaged transport." "That is suicide, Lieutenant," said Ensign George Ross. "The destroyers are hunting us now. They know where we are." "That is exactly why we attack," Kennedy replied. "They expect us to run. We do the opposite." He swung PT 109 around in a tight circle. The boat heeled over so far that water came across the deck. Then he pointed the bow straight at the burning transport ship and pushed the throttles forward again. The Packard engines responded instantly. The boat accelerated to 41 knots in less than 30 seconds. Wind tore at Kennedy's face. The deck vibrated under his feet from the raw power of those engines. But Commander Hanami saw him coming. The Amagirai had been turning to pursue another PT boat when Hanami spotted the white wake cutting through the darkness, heading directly toward the damaged transport. "That boat!" he shouted. "It is coming back. All guns target that boat." The Amagirai's 5-inch guns swung toward PT 109. Tracers from smaller guns reached out like red fingers. Kennedy saw the gunfire coming and jinked the boat hard to starboard, then back to port. The shells missed by 50 yards. "Torpedoes ready." Druitt shouted from his position at the tubes. "Fire 1 and 2. Kennedy ordered. .2 torpedoes dropped from their tubes and splashed into the water. Their engines fired up and they raced toward the transport at 46 knots. Kennedy did not wait to see if they hit. He spun the wheel hard and aimed PT 109 away from the convoy at maximum speed. .1 torpedo missed. The other hit the transport below the waterline. The ship shuddered and began to sink faster. Japanese sailors jumped into the water, abandoning ship. Hanami watched the second attack with growing respect and rage. These American boat crews were brave. Foolishly brave, perhaps, but brave nonetheless. They attacked ships 10 times their size without hesitation. They came back for more punishment when any sane crew would run away. "That boat must be destroyed," Hanami said quietly. "Helm, pursue that target. Flank speed." The Amagirai turned to chase PT 109. The big destroyer's engines roared to maximum power. Its bow cut through the water, pushing up waves on both sides. The speed indicator climbed to 36 knots, then 37. Kennedy looked back and saw the destroyer coming. It was gaining on them. Somehow, impossibly, the Japanese ship was matching their speed. "She's coming up fast." McMahon shouted from the engine room. "I've got everything these engines can give. Give me more." Kennedy shouted back. "Find me one more knot." McMahon adjusted fuel mixture and timing. The engine screamed in protest, but gave him what he wanted. PT 109 edged up to 42 knots. But it was not enough. The Amagirai was still gaining. The problem was the sea state. The water in Blackhead Strait was choppy from all the boat wakes and explosions. The PT boat's lightweight hull bounced over every wave, losing precious speed with each impact. The destroyer's massive hull just plowed through the waves without slowing down. "She's going to ram us," Ross yelled. Kennedy looked back again. The destroyer's bow was only 200 yards behind them now, and closing fast. He could see the white bone in its teeth, the huge wave pushed up by the steel hull. If that bow hit them, PT-109 would be cut in half like paper. He had seconds to make a decision. Turn left or right and expose the boat's side to gunfire. Speed up, which was impossible. Or slow down and try something crazy. Helm hard to starboard. Kennedy shouted. Cut across her bow. That is insane. Ross protested. Do it. Kennedy spun the wheel. PT-109 turned sharply to the right, cutting directly in front of the charging destroyer. For a moment, it looked like they would make it. The PT boat was faster in the turn. They would cross just ahead of the Amajurai's bow. But Commander Hanami anticipated the move. He had fought in many battles. He knew desperation when he saw it. Helm, follow that boat's turn. Hanami ordered. Maintain speed. We will run them down. The Amajurai turned with PT-109. The destroyer's bow stayed locked on the small boat, like a compass needle pointing north. The distance closed to 100 yards. Then 50 yards. Kennedy saw the massive steel bow filling his vision. He heard the roar of the destroyer's engines. He smelled the smoke from its stacks. There was nowhere left to run. The Amajurai struck PT-109 at 36 knots. The destroyer's bow cut through the wooden hull like an axe through kindling. The PT boat exploded in a shower of splinters and burning gasoline. Kennedy woke up in the water, choking on oil and salt water. His head pounded. He could not remember the collision, only a massive impact, and then flying through the air. Now he was swimming in darkness, surrounded by burning gasoline that floated on the surface like liquid fire. Sound off, he shouted into the night. Everyone sound off. Voices came back from the darkness. One by one, his crew reported in. McMahon, Ross, McGuire, Druich. But some voices were missing. 2 men had been in the forward gun turret when the destroyer hit. They were gone, killed instantly in the collision. McMahon is burned bad, someone shouted. His hands and face. Kennedy swam toward the voice. He found McMahon floating on his back, groaning in pain. The explosion had covered him in burning gasoline before he could jump clear. His hands were blistered and his face was red and peeling. I got you, Mac, Kennedy said. Stay with me. Around them, pieces of PT-109 floated in the water. The stern section, with the engines, had sunk immediately. But the bow section remained afloat, kept up by sealed compartments. 11 survivors clung to the wreckage, treading water in the dark. The Amajurai had not stopped. It could not stop. Commander Hanami stood on the bridge, looking back at the burning wreckage. Part of him wanted to search for survivors to take prisoner, but his orders were clear. Complete the supply mission and return to base before dawn. Japanese destroyers never stopped for anything. Continue on course, Hanami ordered. But his voice was heavy. He had won the engagement. He had destroyed the enemy boat. But victory tasted like ashes in his mouth. Back in the water, Kennedy organized his crew. They could not stay with the wreckage. Japanese ships were all around them. Daylight would bring enemy aircraft. They needed to reach land. There, Ross pointed to the south. I see an island, maybe 3 miles away. It was Plum Pudding Island, a tiny piece of land barely visible in the darkness. 3 miles was not far, but for men in the water with no life jackets, it was a marathon, and McMahon could not swim with his burned hands. We swim for it, Kennedy decided. I will tell McMahon. Everyone else, stay together. If you get tired, float on your back and rest. But we all reached that island together. Kennedy tied a strap for McMahon's life vest in his teeth and began to swim. He used a side stroke, pulling McMahon through the water. The others swam around him in a loose group. It took them 5 hours to reach the island. They dragged themselves onto the beach just as dawn was breaking on August 2nd, 1943. Plum Pudding Island was barely 100 yards long, covered with palm trees and underbrush. There was no fresh water. There was no food. But it was land, and they were alive. Kennedy counted heads again. 11 men had survived from a crew of 13. They huddled under the palm trees, exhausted and hurting. McMahon lay on his back, moaning softly from the pain of his burns. Without medical treatment, he might die from infection. We need to signal for rescue, Kennedy said. But we cannot make a fire. Japanese planes patrol these waters during the day. For 3 days, they hit on the island. During the day, They stayed under cover, watching Japanese ships pass nearby. At night, Kennedy swam to other islands, looking for food, water, or help. He found nothing. On the fourth day, Kennedy swam to Nauru Island, a slightly larger island a mile away. He hoped to find friendly natives or coast watchers. The coast watchers were brave men, both native islanders and Australians, who hid on Japanese-held islands and radioed information about enemy movements to Allied forces. As Kennedy searched Nauru Island, 2 native scouts found him first. They appeared silently from the jungle. Kennedy froze, not sure if they were friendly or enemies. The Solomon Islanders had been caught between 2 armies for nearly 2 years. Some helped the Japanese, some helped the Americans. Most just wanted the war to end. But these men were coast watchers. They worked for the Allies. One of them could speak English. "You America?" the man asked. "Yes," Kennedy said. "I am Lieutenant Kennedy. My boat was sunk. I have 10 men on Plum Pudding Island. We need help." The coast watcher nodded. "We help. We get message to your base." Kennedy found a coconut and used his knife to carve a message on the shell. 11 alive. Need small boat. Kennedy. He gave the coconut to the coast watchers, who paddled away in their canoe. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away at Japanese naval headquarters in Rabaul, Commander Hanami was writing his after-action report. He sat at a desk under a slowly turning ceiling fan, trying to find the right words. "The enemy employed small high-speed torpedo boats," he wrote. "Previous intelligence underestimated their capabilities. These craft are capable of speeds exceeding 40 knots. They are armed with torpedoes and automatic weapons. They attack without warning and withdraw before defensive fire can be effective." He paused, thinking about the brave crew of PT-109. They had not run away. They had attacked twice against impossible odds. That took courage. Recommendation. He continued writing. "All destroyers must treat these boats as serious threats. Searchlights and maximum speed should be employed immediately upon contact. The small size and high speed of these craft make them difficult targets. Standard anti-aircraft gunnery may not be effective." Hanami finished his report and sealed it in an envelope. He knew what it meant. He was admitting that he had been wrong. The American PT boats were not toys. They were weapons. Dangerous weapons. His report went up the chain of command. Other reports came in from other engagements. PT boats were attacking Japanese convoys all across the Solomon Islands. The Tokyo Express was no longer safe. On August 8, 1943, 6 days after the collision, a PT boat crept into the waters near Plum Pudding Island after dark. Kennedy saw its silhouette and swam out to meet it. He was so weak he could barely climb aboard. "Lieutenant Kennedy," the PT boat captain asked, "we have been looking for you for 6 days. Everyone thought you were dead." "Not yet," Kennedy replied. "But we need to get McMahon to a hospital fast. And I need a new boat." The rescue boat picked up all 11 survivors and raced back to Rendova Base. News of their survival spread through the PT boat squadrons like wildfire. Kennedy became famous overnight. The man who survived a destroyer ramming and lived to tell about it. But he did not feel like a hero. He felt like he had failed. 2 of his men were dead. 3 months had passed since that terrible night in Blackhead Strait. Now it was November 1943, and everything had changed in the Solomon Islands campaign. The balance of power was shifting toward America. More ships, more planes, more men arrived every week. The Japanese were being pushed back, island by island, but the night battles continued. The Tokyo Express still ran, though less frequently now. Japanese garrisons were running out of food and ammunition. They needed supplies desperately. The destroyers still came, racing through the darkness, but they came with fear now. Commander Hanami stood on a new bridge on a different night. The WWII had been damaged in October by an American torpedo. While it was being repaired, Hanami had been transferred to the destroyer Hajikase. His new ship was faster and newer, with better radar and more powerful searchlights, but speed and power were not enough anymore. The Americans had adapted too. Their PT boats now hunted in larger packs. They had better radios and better tactics. And every Japanese sailor now knew that these small boats could kill. Radar contact, Lieutenant Kohei reported. He had been promoted and transferred with Hanami. The two men had become an effective team. Multiple fast-moving targets, bearing 270. Range 8,000 meters. Speed, Hanami asked calmly. 42 knots, sir. No one questioned the radar readings anymore. No one claimed the equipment was broken. They had learned that lesson in Blood and Fire. Sound general quarters, Hanami ordered. All guns to surface action. Illuminate targets with searchlights. Do not wait for them to close. Engage at maximum range. This was the new doctrine. The Japanese Navy had issued new orders to all destroyers after analyzing reports from dozens of engagements with PT boats. Treat them as capital ships. Use searchlights immediately. Fire at extreme range. Never let them get close enough to launch torpedoes. The Hajike's 5-inch guns trained toward the radar contacts. The searchlights stabbed through the darkness, sweeping across the water in wide arcs. Hanami gripped the bridge railing and waited. On the other side of the strait, Kennedy commanded PT-59. It was not the same boat as PT-109, but felt like home. The same Packard engines, the same vibration through the deck, the same smell of gasoline and salt water. He had a new crew, mostly new faces, but McMahon had recovered from his burns and refused to serve on any other boat. He was back in the engine room, where he belonged. They have spotted us early, Kennedy said into his radio, speaking to the other 5 PT boats in his squadron. New plan: split up and attack from 4 directions at once. They cannot shoot at all of us. This was American adaptation. The PT boat crews had learned from their losses. They no longer attacked in straight lines. They swarmed like wasps, coming from every direction, forcing the enemy to divide their fire. All boats, execute attack pattern Delta, Kennedy ordered. Mark your targets and fire at will. The 6 PT boats split apart, each one racing at maximum speed in a different direction. They would circle around and converge on the Japanese convoy from north, south, east, and west simultaneously. It was harder to coordinate, but much harder to defend against. Hanami watched his radar screen as the PT boats scattered. He felt a cold respect for whoever commanded those boats. That commander had learned from previous battles, just as Hanami had learned. They're using multiple approach vectors, Kohei observed. We cannot cover all angles. Then we choose our targets carefully, Hanami replied. Focus searchlights on the closest threats. Gun crews will engage targets as they illuminate. We must make every shot count. The battle began at 10,000 meters, farther than any previous engagement. Japanese searchlights swept the darkness. When they caught a PT boat in their beam, every gun that could bear opened fire. But the PT boats were ready for this tactic. They jinked and dodged, never staying in a searchlight beam for more than 3 seconds. Kennedy felt the familiar rush of adrenaline as tracers zipped past his boat. A searchlight caught them for a moment, and shells bracketed their position. He spun the wheel hard, cutting back into darkness. The shells fell harmlessly behind them. Range for 1,000 meters, McGuire called out. We are in torpedo range. Not yet, Kennedy said. Get closer. These fish are too unreliable at long range. He pushed the throttles forward to maximum. PT-59 leaped ahead, accelerating to 43 knots. Around him, the other boats were doing the same, all converging on the Japanese convoy from different angles. Hanami saw them coming on radar. 4 contacts from the north, 2 from the south. His convoy had 3 destroyers and 2 transport ships. They were outnumbered but not outgunned. Concentrate fire on the northern group, he ordered. They're the main threat. The Hajike's and her sister ships turned to face north, pouring fire into the darkness. 1 PT boat was hit. Its engines exploded in a ball of fire, but the other 3 kept coming. And while the Japanese guns were pointed north, Kennedy attacked from the south. Fire torpedoes 1 through 4, he shouted. All 4 torpedoes dropped from their tubes and raced toward the convoy. Kennedy did not wait to see results. He spun the boat around and raced away at maximum speed. Behind him, he heard explosions. At least 1 torpedo had hit something, The battle lasted only 12 minutes, but it felt like hours. When it was over, one Japanese transport was sinking and the Hajikes had taken a torpedo hit in her engine room. She was not sinking, but she could only make 15 knots. The other Japanese ships had to escort her back to base slowly. On the American side, one PT boat was destroyed and another was damaged. But they had stopped the convoy. The supplies never reached the Japanese garrison. As dawn broke, the two forces withdrew. Hanami stood on his damaged bridge, watching the American boats disappear over the horizon at 40 knots. His ship could not catch them now. Perhaps it never could have. Sent a message to headquarters, Hanami said quietly to his radio officer. Mission unsuccessful. Enemy torpedo boats prevented supply delivery. Our ship damaged. Requesting escort for return to base. It was a bitter message to send, but there was no shame in it anymore. Everyone understood now. The PT boats were real threats. Small did not mean weak. Fast did not mean vulnerable. Sir, Kohei said, the Americans fought well tonight. Yes, Hanami agreed. They learned from their losses as we learned from ours. That is the way of war. Both sides adapt or both sides die. Kennedy reached Rendova base at sunrise. He tied up PT 59 at the dock and shut down the engines. McMahon climbed out of the engine room, covered in grease and smiling. Those packets did not let us down, he said. 43 knots steady. Could have given you more if you needed it. You gave us exactly what we needed, Mac, Kennedy replied. We hurt them tonight. Really hurt them. The war in the Solomon Islands would continue for many more months. Both sides would fight many more night battles. More PT boats would be sunk. More destroyers would be damaged. But after November 1943, nobody underestimated anybody anymore. The Japanese knew that small boats could kill big ships. The Americans knew that destroyers could still fight back hard. Respect, earned in blood and fire, had replaced arrogance on both sides. That was the most important lesson of all. In war, the moment you stop respecting your enemy is the moment you have already lost.